Good afternoon and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas in the Rio Grande Valley of Deep South Texas. Got a great program lined up for you today. Our El Paso correspondent Julian Resendiz is going to be leading a conversation with a guest we've had on the program before, and we are talking about Mr. Michael Ballard, with the Director of Intelligence for Global Guardian. They're going to be talking about everything Venezuela today, so looking forward to that conversation. But first, as always, let's go ahead and take a look at what's trending across the border, starting in Minnesota, where 2,000 federal agents have descended on the state in the latest federal immigration crackdown in the United States. Agents and officers from Immigration and Customs Enforcement's Deportation Branch and Homeland Security investigations are in the Minneapolis area. The plan is for the agents and officers to oversee a 30-day surge in operations in the Twin Cities area, making the region the first major target of the Trump administration's expanded immigration crackdown in 2026. U.S. Customs and Border Protection Commander Gregory Bovino, who has overseen controversial immigration roundups in Los Angeles, Chicago, Charlotte, and New Orleans, is expected to arrive in Minnesota to help lead immigration enforcement efforts. Video released on the social media platform X by Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem shows agents arresting what she says was a criminal from Ecuador wanted for murder and sexual assault. The deployment, which began Sunday, represents one of the largest concentrations of DHS personnel in one U.S. city in recent years. And staying in Minnesota, a Minnesota hotel that wouldn't allow federal immigration agents to stay there this month is apologizing and saying the refusal violated its own policies. DHS accused the Hilton hotel chain of a, quote, coordinated effort to refuse service to its employees. DHS shared screenshots of an email from a Hilton address on Friday stating immigration agents wouldn't be allowed at the Hampton Inn, Lakeville, and their reservation had been canceled. Though the hotel is under the Hilton brand, Hilton said the property is independently operated and quickly apologized. This morning, it said it was removing the Hampton Inn from its systems. A group of builders in South Texas hosted a roundtable discussion on Monday with Republican Congresswoman Monica de la Cruz right here in the Rio Grande Valley. The topic was the impact the immigration enforcement actions carried out by ICE and other federal agencies are having on construction businesses here in our region. Brian Svensson has the details of the story from McAllen, Texas.
Representative Monica de la Cruz says the South Texas Builders Association invited her to come speak with them about the immigration crackdown builders and construction companies have been facing.
We gave her our concerns. Now we're hoping that she uses the voice that she has that represents us to take that voice to a higher power and that they're able to listen to her.
Mario Guerrero, executive director of the STBA, says he thinks the focus on the construction industry is because it's low-hanging fruit.
If there's just a house being built, they could just walk in there and start questioning people, and that's what's happening.
De la Cruz says she's seeing ICE raids more concentrated in the Rio Grande Valley, but didn't want to speculate on the reason, saying that was a question for ICE.
You know, the people are scared. People are terrified. Like, it's scary. Like, it's scary. It's scary to the person that is trying to provide food for their family.
De la Cruz says she's working on legislation called the Dignity Act to try and provide some undocumented workers with a legal way to work in the U.S.
We want to make sure that we have a healthy economy, that people who came here to work are able to work, and they're able to work in peace.
The Dignity Act was introduced last July, and De la Cruz signed on as a co-sponsor last month.
What we need to figure out, and what I'm going to advocate for, is a way for them to have some type of legal status.
According to the congressional website, the act has been referred to different committees, but no other action has been taken. The representative says she's going to meet with Speaker of the House Mike Johnson on Wednesday to discuss the proposed law. Guerrero says he knows these issues won't be solved overnight. He says the system has failed because there are workers too afraid to come to a job site and a lack of workers from younger generations unprepared to step into those roles.
So if we don't raise our voice now, we're going to allow this to cripple our economy. And if we let that happen, it's going to ruin the valley.
Working for you, I'm Brian Svensson.
Thank you for your reporting on that one, Brian. Time now to bring in our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendiz, and our guest for today's program, Michael Ballard, Director of Intelligence at Global Guardian. Julian?
Thank you, Rudy. Mike, good to see you back on our program. And let me start off with this on the conversation on Venezuela. By now, I think everybody has seen the videos of the bombing in Caracas, the videos of President Maduro being paraded to the courthouse and all that. And obviously, the main question right now would be what comes next. The U.S. went into Venezuela, removed the president of Venezuela, who was under federal indictment in the U.S. for pretty much a whole slew of charges involving racketeering. But the big question in everybody's mind is what's going to happen next? What is the next shoe to drop? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think in Venezuela, there was a lot of just question marks, frankly, about who's going to be in charge. We were speculating before President Trump's press conference on Saturday at 11 about some possible scenarios moving forward. One of which was that Vice President Delcy Rodriguez ascends to the presidency, and that she's basically a compliant partner with the U.S. And I think that seems to be what's borne out. She's issued statements saying that the Venezuelan government is going to act in a collaborative way with the United States and cooperate on across different agendas. But the regime is still there, and I don't know that we're going to see any significant change on the ground in Venezuela, at least in the near term.
Yes, that's as far as Venezuela. Now, when it comes to the U.S., how is this going to affect us here in the United States? I heard some voices saying, well, maybe it's going to reduce the flow of drugs from Colombia to Venezuela and from Venezuela to Mexico and the U.S. Other people are saying, well, maybe now migration flows will either increase or decrease from Venezuela. And finally, I've also heard that maybe we can see some additional deportation flights. I know that a big portion of Venezuelans came into the U.S. In between ports of entry, seeking asylum or otherwise in 2020, 21, 22, etc. What can we expect here in the U.S. as a result of this action in Venezuela?
Yeah, I think you are going to see increased deportation flights that are going to be landing in Venezuela. I think that's going to be one of the conditions of from the U.S. side saying you're going to help us out here, or the same thing might happen to you as just happened to Maduro. And I think when you have an easy enough task as allowing an aircraft to land at an airport and drop off deported migrants, I think that's something we're going to see. When it comes to migration, either in or out of Venezuela, that's still very much up in the air. I think 6, 9, 12 months from now, you could actually see people, Venezuelan refugees, leaving Colombia, Brazil, leaving the U.S. and going back if the outlook has improved significantly, if there's a timeline and a plan for a transition to a legitimate democracy. As far as drug trafficking, there's still this hasn't changed the demand. This hasn't changed the supply. You still have a very large kind of drug trafficking patronage network that exists within Venezuela, where police, military, soldiers, generals, all the way up, they're all profiting from it and oversee part of it. And I don't think you're going to stop that without either U.S. boots on the ground or a complete 180 reversal from Venezuela's security apparatus to all of a sudden, stop doing that and crack down on it, which I just don't think is likely at this point.
Yes, Mike, you and I were talking just a while ago about the corruption in Venezuela, the decades-long corruption, how it goes all the way from the top of the government to the very bottom of the government, and even through the civil portion, through the so-called colectivos and groups, partisan groups amiable to the Maduro regime. It's going to be very difficult to replace that system overnight, which brings the next question. And that is, why do you think President Trump chose to leave those people in place, as opposed to bringing in, let's say, the very popular opposition candidate, Maria Corina Machado? What happened there?
Yeah, I think they kind of looked at the reality on the ground, the reality of the entrenched and frankly, like you said, corrupt security apparatus and infrastructure that's in place there. You can't simply install an opposition leader and all of a sudden all of these people who run security who oversee these colectivos, the pro-Maduro militias that you mentioned, they're not all of a sudden just going to listen to Machado or whoever, would be president there. And so I think they realize that this is going to be a bit of a slow burn to try and transition into a democracy, hopefully. And I think they realize that, again, trying to flip a switch and immediately install the opposition leadership without real mechanisms for change would not be a good idea in the near term.
Yeah, you and I were talking a while ago about the Iraq, the lessons learned by the U.S. in Iraq and other places, in which in the past they have gone in, taken out the existing government, tried to replace it, and then chaos and in some cases civil war. You think that also factor into this decision by the Trump administration?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. You don't want to, in a fragile scenario, fragile situation, you don't want a power vacuum. That's where you get fighting in and amongst the different groups, the different folks who have interests in everything that's going on, either to maintain those or to try and shut them down. And what you saw in Iraq, the debathification of the army, it left a power vacuum, a security vacuum. It let all these different groups in to try and fill that void. And, you could see something similar in Venezuela if they were to try and, purge the entire security apparatus, the army, the police. You could easily see guerrilla groups, insurgent groups, ELN, FARC, other ex-FARC dissident groups maybe make inroads into Venezuela and capture some of that territory if there's no kind of functioning security apparatus.
Let's bring the story back again to the U.S. and also to what you just mentioned about the volatility of the region. Right now, what would you tell your clients, people who have business dealings, perhaps not in Venezuela, that's been very difficult lately, but maybe in Colombia, maybe in Brazil, other places close to Venezuela. What are you telling them right now?
Yeah, at Global Guardian, we have, obviously, Global's in our name. We have clients all over the world. We have a pretty big footprint in Colombia and Brazil, particularly. We've had some clients reach out and ask us, is this going to lead to another exodus of Venezuelans into Colombia, into Brazil that could potentially be disruptive? We don't think that's likely at this point. It's kind of status quo. Colombia has been mentioned as a potential, and President Petro, a little bit defiant towards Trump, has been floated as a potential target, so to speak, of where something like this could happen again. I don't see that as likely at this point, but this is going to have some regional ramifications for sure.
All right.
We're speaking with Director of Intelligence at Global Guardian, Mr. Mike Ballard, about what's going on in Venezuela. We're going to take a very quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation on the other end. So stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. Bringing back in now our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendiz, and our guest for today's program, Director of Intelligence at Global Guardian, Mr. Michael Ballard.
Thank you, Rudy. Like we mentioned at the top of the show, Venezuela is pretty far away from us. It's at least 2,000 miles from the U.S. border. However, what happens over there has in the past definitely affected us here. We just saw in the past few years the coming and passage of hundreds of thousands of Venezuelan nationals, like Mike, like you mentioned. About 8 million people have been displaced from Venezuela in decades past during both the Maduro as well as the previous Chavez regime. And those people, many of those people eventually find their way over here. But we were also talking, and I'd like to move on to this topic. We were also talking about regional ramifications. You just spoke about Colombia. And the possible repercussions that this might have on that nation's leader. But what about Mexico? I was reading the indictment against Maduro filed in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. And there's a lot of references here in this document to illicit activities that originated perhaps in Venezuela, perhaps in Colombia, but definitely passed through Venezuela, the Caribbean, the Eastern Pacific, Mexico, and then the U.S. What can Mexico expect after this? I know their president is a progressive. She has been very strong in defending her country's sovereignty. She has been at odds with some of the things that President Trump has done, including the extraction of Maduro. And also, in yesterday's show, we talked about how President Trump had some cautionary words for what's going on in Mexico. So my question to you, Mike, is what can Mexico expect after this? What's the sort of like the in between? What can really in between the lines for Mexico?
Yeah, I think that the most likely impact that you'll see in Mexico will be either utilizing this type of tactical prowess that the U.S. has with its special forces and Delta Force and those operators to either fly in under cover of darkness to snatch and grab cartel kingpins, El Mencho, some of El Chapo Guzman's sons, other kingpins who are running things on the cartel side in Mexico. They could either carry those out right under the assumption that they are fugitives from justice. They can be prosecuted under similar drug trafficking laws as they're going after for Maduro. I think it's more likely that you'll see this used as a threat to the Mexican government in future negotiations over trade deals, over migration policies, over border control, right? Using this pressure of, hey, this isn't just something that we think we can do. We know we can do this. And you don't want U.S. Blackhawks and Delta Force operators landing in, sovereign Mexican soil and embarrassing the country, right? If you can't bring these people to justice, then we will. But I think it's going to be used more of a threat to try and extract concessions that are important to this administration around drug trafficking, border control, immigration, that sort of thing.
Mike, speaking of El Mencho, the leader of the Jalisco New Generation cartel, one of the main distributors of fentanyl into the United States, why has the Mexican government not been able to capture him and also the two remaining sons of El Chapo Guzman, who allegedly continue to run the Sinaloa cartel?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of extreme sophistication on the side of the cartels. They have pretty unbelievable technological things at their disposal. They are highly sophisticated when it comes to their operational security, the technology that they can deploy to minimize their electronic footprint. The other half of that is that there is a lot of corruption. They pay off the right people, and they are protected through that same, that same bribery and coercion, right? Plato o plomo. It's kind of still applies, right? You can either comply with us and get paid, or we're going to go after you, go after your family, and it's tough for people in many positions to make those decisions. So I think that's part of why they have not been captured yet.
Do you think that after what happened with Maduro in Venezuela, the capture of El Mencho or the Chapitos is more likely now in Mexico?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think you might see something like that, maybe maybe El Mencho or one of the Guzman sons. I think you might see one of those two groups get targeted, even if there are concessions granted by Mexico, I think in part just to send a message and make a statement. But I don't think you're going to see this become a routine function, for the U.S. from both a military and a police operations side, where every month they're, flying into Mexico and snatching somebody.
All right. Getting the story back to the United States, one of the things that President Trump said about the action in Venezuela is that this will bring opportunity for U.S. companies to go in and especially get back into the oil industry, in which they were already present before Chavez, before Maduro, a few decades back. How likely do you think that's going to happen, and how long is it going to take? I imagine a lot of people are still taking a wait-and-see attitude.
Yeah, Venezuela is, the situation there. It's one of the great tragedies in all of modern history. The economic collapse, the 80% shrinkage of GDP and the 8 million people that have left. Their oil production has fallen pretty much every year since Chavez took over. I think they were at something like 3 or 4 million barrels a day of production, and now they're just under 1 million barrels per day. The issue is that Venezuela's crude oil reserves are a very different chemistry than what you have in other countries. It's heavy, it's sour, a lot of sulfur. There are heavy metals that are in there. I've learned more about the petroleum industry in the last 48 hours than I knew in the rest of my whole life. But the cost and the time to be able to not only extract, transport, refine, and bring all of that extra capacity to market will take upwards of 10, 15, 20 years and hundreds, over $100 billion. I've seen estimates over $500 billion of investment. And what is interesting is right now you have oil at very low levels, and there's not a lot of incentive that I can see for the major oil and gas companies to invest hundreds of billions of dollars into bringing Venezuelan oil production back up when the price of oil is already low. And this will only increase supply, which will necessarily drive price down even further. So from an economic perspective, it's going to be a while.
Right. One final question on my part, and that is, we've been talking to several Venezuelans who are living here in the United States. We're not talking about migrants per se. We're talking about the business people, the wealthy people that came over fleeing Chavez, fleeing Maduro. And they're obviously happy that there's been if not a regime change, if the principal figurehead is now behind bars here in the U.S. But there's also some, I guess, a little bit of a disappointment that elections, special elections, immediate elections were not called, that President Trump was a little bit dismissive of the opposition candidate, Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Corina Machado. What do you make of that as far as when will we see democracy kind of again take hold in Venezuela? When can we see this Venezuelans in the U.S. Confident enough to go back?
Yeah, I think this is part of the reason why, as I mentioned earlier, why they kind of struck a deal with Delcy Rodriguez, and they knew that they needed a little bit of time, a fair amount of time to be able to transition. They needed a compliant partner, and like I said, flipping the switch straight from the Maduro regime to free and fair democracy overnight is incredibly difficult, and I think would have led to more problems than they already have right now.
Got it. Thank you very much, Mike. We really appreciate your being on the show again.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. We've been speaking with Director of Intelligence at Global Guardian, Mr. Mike Ballard, about everything happening right now surrounding Venezuela. Stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. Got a couple more headlines to get to you before we head out for the day. Starting with the tiny Caribbean island nation of Dominica, it's right there on your screen, is going to start receiving foreigners seeking U.S. asylum. It's located between Guadeloupe and Martinique. The island has a population of 72,000 people, and on Monday, the United States reached a deal with Dominica to start accepting asylees. The country was recently hit with a partial U.S. visa restriction. Dominica's government has been in talks with U.S. officials to try to resolve the U.S. entry limitations. Monday's announcement has left many locals living there concerned about whether the island has enough resources to absorb asylum seekers into its population. And in Florida, the state is wanting more immigrants. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says his state is waiting for federal approval to open a third immigration detention center in the Panhandle. The state is also considering a fourth facility in South Florida. The new center would follow two existing ones known as Alligator Alcatraz and Deportation Depot. We're showing you some images from those two on your screen now. DeSantis said the decision depends on the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, but he believes more detention space is needed. Florida has been leading other states in constructing these facilities. And really quick, before we go, we wanted to remind you to check out our partners at Political Power Ranker. It's a show weekly tracking the movers, shakers, and rule makers in American politics. So make sure to check it out. You can find out more about Political Power Ranker at abc27.com, valleycentral.com, or your local Nexstar station's website. Well, that's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much to our guest for today's program, Director of Intelligence at Global Guardian, Michael Ballard, and our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendiz. Until next time, have a good day.